The first time Captain Sarah Chen saw a Vorthak up close, her immediate thought was that evolution had made a terrible mistake. The creature stood nearly 3 meters tall, its obsidian carapace gleaming under the harsh lights of Kepler Station's detention bay. 6 arms ended in claws that could slice through titanium, and its 4 eyes burned with an intelligence that made her skin crawl. This particular Vorthak had killed 17 beings across 3 different systems before the Galactic Enforcement Corps finally captured it. Beautiful specimen, isn't it? Dr. Marcus Webb adjusted his glasses as he studied the containment field readings. The Vorthak are perhaps the most efficient predators the galaxy has ever produced. Their neural architecture is fascinating, completely alien to anything we understand about consciousness. Sarah crossed her arms, watching as the creature paced within its energy prison. What's fascinating is why the Council thinks we can do anything with these monsters that they haven't already tried. The Galactic Council had been dealing with the Vorthak problem for over 2 centuries. These beings appeared randomly throughout known space, usually alone, always violent. They attacked without warning, killed without mercy, and died without explanation. No one had ever successfully communicated with one. No one had ever captured one alive until recently, and even then, they refused to eat, speak, or acknowledge any attempt at interaction. "That's exactly why they called us," Webb replied, his excitement barely contained. "Humanity has only been part of the galactic community for 50 years, but we've already earned a reputation for unconventional solutions. The Council is desperate enough to try anything." Sarah wasn't convinced. Humanity's reputation in the galaxy was mixed at best. Other species found humans unpredictable, emotional, and dangerously curious. Most galactic citizens preferred to keep their distance from the newcomers who had somehow managed to achieve faster-than-light travel despite being barely past their nuclear age when first contact occurred. The detention bay doors hissed open, and Commander Zith Ka entered with his typical Altarian grace. The tall, blue-skinned alien moved with the fluid precision of his species, but Sarah could see the tension in his posture. "Captain Chen, Dr. Webb," Zith Ka's translator rendered his clicks and whistles into perfect English. "I must protest this entire endeavor once more. The Vorthak have killed more sentient beings in the last decade than any war in recent history. Your species' involvement could make the situation significantly worse." Sarah had heard this argument before. The Altarians, like most older galactic civilizations, believed in careful, methodical approaches to problems. They had spent decades studying the Vorthak from a distance, cataloging their attacks, analyzing their biology from remains left behind. All of it had led nowhere. "With respect, Commander, your careful methods haven't worked," Sarah replied. "In 200 years, has anyone even learned why they kill?" "The why is irrelevant if we cannot stop them," Zith Ka countered. "These creatures are not merely dangerous. They are an existential threat to peaceful civilization. They appear without warning, strike without pattern, and vanish without trace. The only consistent factor is death." Dr. Webb stepped forward, his tablet displaying a holographic star map. Red dots marked known Vorthak attack sites scattered across dozens of sectors. "Actually, Commander, there is a pattern. It's just not one that makes sense to conventional thinking." The hologram zoomed in on specific regions. "Look at the timing and locations. The attacks aren't random. They're concentrated around areas where multiple species interact. Trade stations, diplomatic outposts, cultural exchange centers. Places where different forms of life come together." Zith Ka studied the display, his large eyes reflecting the red warning lights. "You believe they target diversity?" "I believe they target something we don't understand yet," Webb corrected. "But every successful first contact in history has started with one species willing to take a risk that others wouldn't." Sarah moved closer to the containment field. The Vorthak had stopped pacing and now stood perfectly still, all 4 eyes fixed on her. There was something in its gaze that reminded her of the feral cats she used to feed as a child. Dangerous, yes, but not mindlessly violent. There was calculation there, maybe even pain. "What do we know about their biology?" she asked. Webb pulled up another display. Remarkable in every way, they're essentially living weapons, enhanced reflexes, redundant organ systems, regenerative capabilities that border on miraculous. But here's the interesting part. Their brain chemistry suggests they're capable of complex emotional responses. Emotional responses? Zithka's translator couldn't quite capture his tone of disbelief. Fear, anger, sadness, all the basic emotional markers are present in their neural scans, but there's something else, something we've never seen in any species. Their emotional centers are hyperactive, constantly flooded with stress hormones and pain responses. Sarah frowned. "You're saying they're in constant agony?" "It's possible. Imagine being trapped in a body designed for violence with a mind capable of understanding what you're doing but unable to stop. Every Vorthak we've studied shows signs of severe psychological trauma." The creature suddenly moved, not toward them but toward the back wall of its cell. It placed one clawed hand against the barrier and made a sound, low, keening, almost musical. Sarah had heard similar sounds before in hospitals and refugee camps. It was the sound of grief. "Commander Zithka," Sarah said quietly, "when was the first Vorthak attack recorded?" The Altarian consulted his own device. 237 years ago, in the Helix Nebula region, a science station studying exotic matter was found destroyed, all personnel killed. "What kind of exotic matter?" "Temporal research, I believe. They were investigating methods of accelerated evolution for agricultural purposes." Sarah felt something click into place. "Dr. Webb, is it possible the Vorthak aren't naturally occurring?" Webb's eyes widened. "You mean they're artificial? Created?" "I mean, they're victims." The Vorthak in the cell had begun making more sounds, each one distinct and purposeful. It wasn't just grief. It was trying to communicate. "Captain, you cannot seriously be considering direct contact," Zithka warned. "These creatures have never shown anything but hostility." "Because no one has ever tried to help them," Sarah replied. She turned to Webb. "What would happen if we lowered the containment field's intensity? Not enough to let it escape, but enough to reduce its discomfort?" "The energy barrier is designed to cause pain on contact," Webb admitted. "It's the only thing that has proven effective at containing them. So we're torturing it. We're preventing it from killing anyone else." Sarah studied the creature again. It had moved to another wall and was pressing both hands against the barrier despite the obvious pain. The pattern of its movements was becoming clear. It was tracing something. "Webb, can you record and analyze its movements?" The doctor worked quickly, his instruments tracking the Vorthak's motions. After several minutes, a pattern emerged on his display. It's mathematical. A complex equation involving quantum mechanics and temporal theory." Zithka stepped closer. "That's impossible. No species develops mathematical ability alongside pure predatory instinct." "Unless the predatory instinct was forced on them," Sarah said grimly. "What if someone took a highly intelligent species and turned them into living weapons? What if they're trying to tell us how it was done?" The implications hung heavy in the air. If the Vorthak had been artificially created, then someone in the galaxy possessed technology capable of rewriting entire species, someone who might still be active. "We need to make contact," Sarah decided. "Absolutely not," Zithka protested. "Even if your theory is correct, the Vorthak remains dangerous. It has killed 17 beings. 17 beings it couldn't communicate with," Sarah corrected. 17 beings who probably treated it as a monster from the moment they saw it. She looked at Webb. "Is there a way to establish communication without lowering the containment field?" "Theoretically, yes." We could modify the barrier to allow sound transmission while maintaining physical containment, but Captain, if you're wrong about this, if I'm wrong, we're no worse off than we were before. If I'm right, we might save countless lives. Webb began working on his equipment while Zith-Ka continued his protests. The Vorthak had stopped moving and was watching them with all four eyes. There was something expectant in its posture now, as if it understood what they were attempting. Audio transmission enabled, Webb announced. The field will still prevent any physical contact, but sound can pass through. Sarah took a deep breath and approached the containment barrier. Can you understand me? The Vorthak tilted its head, a surprisingly familiar gesture. When it spoke, its voice was deep and resonant, nothing like the inhuman roars they had expected. Yes, it said in heavily accented but clear galactic standard. I understand. I have always understood. Zith-Ka's shock was visible even through his alien features. It speaks? I speak because I remember speaking, the Vorthak replied. I remember many things. I remember being different. Sarah's heart raced. What do you remember? I remember having a name, Kreshtak of the mountain clans. I remember my children. I remember the day the ships came and took us for the great purpose. The creature's voice broke slightly. I remember the pain when they changed us. Who changed you? Sarah pressed gently. The ones who call themselves the architects. They said our species was perfect for their design, intelligent enough to learn, strong enough to modify, isolated enough that no one would miss us. Webb was recording everything, his face pale with the implications. How many of your people were taken? All of us. Thousands. They said we would serve the greater good, that our sacrifice would bring order to chaos. They took our children first, said it was easier to modify younger minds. The tragedy of it hit Sarah like a physical blow. An entire species, stolen and transformed into weapons. What was the greater good they spoke of? They never said. Only that the galaxy had become too diverse, too chaotic. Too many species, too many ideas, too many ways of thinking. They said this led to inefficiency, conflict, waste. Zith-Ka had gone very still. The architects believe in imposed order. They believe in control, Kreshtak replied. They view diversity as a flaw to be corrected. My people were their first success, intelligent enough to hunt effectively, but modified to be unable to resist the urge to kill. We were meant to be their answer to the problem of galactic chaos. But you resisted the modification, Sarah observed. Some of us did. The process was imperfect. They could change our bodies completely, alter our brain chemistry, but they could not entirely erase who we were. Some of us retained enough of ourselves to suffer for what we were forced to do. The silence stretched as the full horror became clear. The Vorthak weren't mindless killers. They were prisoners in their own bodies, forced to commit acts of violence while retaining enough consciousness to understand their actions. The mathematical equations you were tracing, Webb said quietly. Were you trying to show us how the modifications work? Yes. I hoped someone would eventually understand. The process can be reversed, but it requires specific quantum resonance patterns and temporal stabilization fields. The same technology they use to change us can change us back. Sarah felt a surge of hope. Do you know where the architects are? They move constantly, always hidden. But they have been watching the results of their experiment. Every attack we make, every death we cause, they study and learn from. They are preparing for the next phase. Next phase? Kreshtak's eyes dimmed. They were not satisfied with our performance. Too unpredictable, too resistant to full control. They have been developing new methods, new subjects, species that might prove more cooperative. The implications were staggering. If the architects were still active, still experimenting, then the Vorthak attacks were just the beginning. Entire civilizations could be at risk. Kreshtak, Sarah said carefully, would you be willing to help us stop them? The creature was quiet for a long moment. You would trust one such as me? After all we have done? You were forced to do those things. That's not the same as choosing to do them. The other survivors of my people, they have been driven mad by what we've become. They attack because the pain of remembering is worse than the pain of killing. I am perhaps the only one still capable of coherent thought. Then you're the only one who can help us save both your people and ours. Kreshtak straightened to his full height. Despite his monstrous appearance, there was something noble in his bearing. If there is a chance to undo what was done to us, to stop the architects from doing it to others, then yes, I will help. Zithka finally spoke. This changes everything. If the architects are real, if they're still active, then we're not dealing with a random threat. We're looking at a deliberate campaign against galactic diversity. Sarah nodded grimly. And humanity, as the newest members of the galactic community, would be prime targets for their next experiment. Not just humanity, Kreshtak added. Any species that shows independence, creativity, unpredictability. The architects view these traits as dangerous to their vision of order. The weight of responsibility settled on Sarah's shoulders. They had come here expecting to study a captured monster, and instead discovered evidence of a conspiracy that threatened every free-thinking species in the galaxy. Dr. Webb, how long would it take to analyze the reversal process Kreshtak described? With his help? Maybe weeks instead of years. But Captain, even if we can reverse the modifications, we're talking about undoing changes made at the quantum level. The process would be incredibly dangerous. More dangerous than letting the architects continue their work? Webb shook his head. No, you're right. We have to try. Zithka activated his communication device. I must report this to the Council immediately. They need to know what we're really facing. Wait, Sarah said. If the architects have been monitoring the Vorthak attacks, they might also be monitoring Council communications. We need to be careful about who we trust with this information. The sobering thought that their discovery might already be compromised cast a shadow over their breakthrough. But as Sarah looked at Kreshtak, still standing proudly despite his imprisonment and the horrors he had endured, she felt something she hadn't expected to feel when facing one of the galaxy's most feared creatures. Hope. 3 weeks later, Captain Sarah Chen stood in what had once been Kepler Station's largest cargo bay and marveled at how quickly her species could adapt to the impossible. The space had been transformed into something between a laboratory, a hospital, and a fortress. At its center, surrounded by the most advanced medical and scientific equipment the galaxy could provide, Kreshtak lay on a specially designed platform while Dr. Webb and his expanded team worked around the clock. The Vorthak's voluntary cooperation had shocked everyone except the humans. While other species demanded additional security measures and fail-safes, Sarah had simply asked Kreshtak what he needed to feel comfortable. The answer had been surprising: music. My people were singers, he had explained through the translator embedded in the medical platform. Before the architects came, we communicated as much through melody as through words. The modifications silenced our songs, but I still remember the harmonies. So now the laboratory hummed with recordings of human classical music, the only species in the galaxy that had developed similar musical traditions to the original Vorthak. Bach's fugues seemed to calm Kreshtak during the most painful procedures, while Beethoven's symphonies gave him strength during the recovery periods. Neural pathway reconstruction is at 60%, announced Dr. Elena Vasquez, one of the xenobiologists who had joined Webb's team. The quantum resonance patterns Kreshtak provided are working, but the process is brutal. Sarah watched through the observation window as Kreshtak's body convulsed during another treatment cycle. The reversal process required essentially rebuilding his nervous system from the cellular level up, undoing modifications that had been integrated into his very DNA. Any other species would have died within hours. The Vorthak's enhanced constitution was the only thing keeping him alive. "Vitals are stabilizing," Webb reported. "But I'm concerned about the psychological integration. We're not just changing his body, we're giving him back memories and emotions that have been suppressed for decades." Commander Zithka observed from another console, his usual composure cracked by weeks of revelations. "I still cannot comprehend how your species proposed such a radical approach. The Council's xenopsychologists recommended months of study before attempting any intervention." Sarah almost smiled. "That's the difference between us, Commander. When humans see someone suffering, our first instinct isn't to study them, it's to help them. Even when someone is a creature that has killed dozens of innocent beings." "Especially then," Sarah replied firmly, "because we understand that sometimes the ones who cause the most damage are the ones in the most pain." The observation had proven accurate in ways that surprised everyone. As Kreshtak's treatments progressed, and his original personality began to reassert itself, other changes became apparent. The Vorthak attacks throughout the galaxy had begun to decrease in frequency and violence. Several incidents had been reported where Vorthak individuals seemed to be fighting their own violent impulses, some even appearing to warn their intended victims before vanishing. "It's like they're all connected somehow," Webb mused, studying the galactic incident reports. As Kreshtak heals, the others seem to be finding moments of clarity. Dr. Vasquez looked up from her neural mapping displays. "It might be quantum entanglement at the consciousness level. If the architects modified the entire species using quantum resonance, there could be lingering connections between all the surviving Vorthak." The implications were staggering. If they could successfully reverse Kreshtak's modifications, they might be able to create a resonance cascade that would help other Vorthak resist their programming as well. "Treatment cycle complete," announced the medical AI. "Patient is entering recovery phase." Kreshtak's voice came through the speakers, weaker than usual, but clear. "Captain Chen, may I speak with you?" Sarah entered the treatment chamber, accompanied by her usual escort of security personnel. Over the weeks, this precaution had become increasingly unnecessary. As Kreshtak regained more of his original personality, his violent impulses had steadily decreased. But regulations were regulations, and other species remained nervous about humanity's unprecedented approach. "How are you feeling?" Sarah asked, settling into the chair beside his platform. "Different. More myself. But also sad in ways I had forgotten were possible." Kreshtak's appearance was changing as well. His obsidian carapace had begun showing flecks of deep blue, and his movements were becoming more graceful, less predatory. "I dream now, Captain. I dream of my children." Sarah's heart tightened. "Tell me about them." "My youngest, Nesh Tak, was barely past her first molting when the architects came. She loved to climb the crystal formations in our mountain caves and sing to the wind spirits. My eldest, Vorth Tak, was preparing for his naming ceremony. He was going to choose the path of a healer." "What happened to them?" Kreshtak was quiet for a long moment. "The architects said children adapted more easily to modification. They were processed first. I have felt their presence in the quantum resonance sometimes, but they are lost to themselves. The modifications were more successful on younger minds." Sarah felt the familiar human urge to fix things, to take action even when the situation seemed hopeless. Could the reversal process work on them too? Perhaps. But Captain, there is something else you must understand. The architects did not abandon their experiments when they released us. They have been watching, learning from our failures and our Resistances. They know about me now. The security feeds around the station had indeed detected unusual activity in recent days, ships appearing briefly at the edge of sensor range before jumping away, communication signals in unknown frequencies, and most disturbing of all, reports from other systems of Vorthak behaving with unprecedented coordination. "They're coming for you," Sarah realized. "They are coming for all of us. Me, because I represent a flaw in their design. You humans, because your species has proven capable of things they did not anticipate." Webb's voice came through the intercom. "Captain, you need to see this. We're receiving a transmission on architect frequencies." Sarah hurried back to the observation room, where a holographic display showed a figure that was almost but not quite human. Tall, pale, with features that were too symmetrical and eyes that held no warmth. When it spoke, its voice carried harmonics that suggested artificial enhancement. "I am Designate Prime of the Architectural Collective. You are interfering with authorized experimental parameters. Cease your activities immediately and surrender the compromised subject designated Vorthak 017. "Compromised subject?" Sarah's anger flared. "His name is Kresh Tak, and he's not a subject, he's a person. The designation possesses neither legal standing nor species recognition within our database. It is modified property of the collective, created for specific purposes. Your interference constitutes theft and sabotage." Commander Zith-Ka stepped forward. "By whose authority do you claim ownership of sentient beings?" Designate Prime's expression didn't change. "By the authority of inevitable progress. The galaxy suffers from excessive diversity, leading to inefficiency, conflict, and waste. The collective provides necessary correction services. Through genocide and slavery," Sarah shot back, "through optimization and purpose, the subjects fulfill functions far beyond their original capabilities. This is improvement, not destruction." Webb had been analyzing the transmission's technical aspects. "Captain, this signal is coming from multiple points simultaneously. They're not using conventional FTL communication. This is quantum entanglement-based. They could be anywhere in the galaxy. The human species has demonstrated concerning adaptability," Designate Prime continued. "Your integration into galactic society has proceeded at unprecedented rates. Your technologies develop unpredictably. Your social structures resist standard modification protocols." The threat was implicit but clear. Humanity was being evaluated as potential subjects for the Architect's next project. "You want to turn us into weapons like you did to the Vorthak," Sarah stated flatly. "We seek to optimize your potential while eliminating your disruptive tendencies. Early projections suggest humans could serve effectively as enforcement specialists with proper neural adjustment." From the treatment chamber, Kresh Tak's voice carried a note of desperate urgency. "Captain, you must understand. They will not negotiate. They will not be reasoned with. To them, free will is a design flaw to be corrected." Sarah looked around the room at her team. Webb was pale but determined, his scientific curiosity now mixed with personal fear. Vasquez was checking weapon systems, her medical training warring with warrior instincts. Even Zith-Ka had shed his usual diplomatic composure in favor of cold anger. "Designate Prime," Sarah said formally. "I am Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earth Federation. I speak for humanity when I say this. We will not surrender Kresh Tak. We will not cease our efforts to help the Vorthak, and we will not submit to your optimization process. Your species lacks the capability to resist collective authority." Sarah smiled grimly. "You know what our species lacks? Common sense. When faced with something bigger and stronger than us, the smart thing would be to run or hide. But humans? We tend to pick up the biggest stick we can find and start swinging. Your primitive aggression is noted. It will be corrected during processing. Here's the thing about human aggression. It's not primitive, and it's not just about violence. It's about protecting what we care about. And right now, we care about Kreshtak and his people." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving the room in tense silence. "That went well," Webb muttered. "Actually, it did," Sarah replied. "We learned several important things. They're not omnipotent. If they were, they wouldn't need to make threats. They're monitoring us, which means they're worried about what we might accomplish. And most importantly, they've never dealt with a species quite like us before." Kreshtak's voice came through the intercom again. "Captain, there is something else. During the transmission, I felt the presence of other Vorthak, many others. The quantum resonance network the architects use to control us, it works both ways. They have gathered a fleet." "How many?" Zithka asked. "Hundreds of my people, all under direct control. They are coming here to retrieve me and eliminate anyone who has learned the truth." Sarah felt the weight of the situation settling on her shoulders. A fleet of modified Vorthak under architect control would be virtually unstoppable. Even with Kepler Station's defenses and the Council ships in the area, they would be outnumbered and outgunned. But something else was stirring in Sarah's mind, a typically human idea that other species would probably consider insane. "Kreshtak, you said the resonance network works both ways. If we can complete your reversal process, would you be able to use that network to reach the others?" "Possibly, but Captain, the risk—" "Could you show them what you've remembered? Could you share the process that's giving you back your true self?" Understanding dawned in Kreshtak's eyes. A quantum cascade of consciousness restoration. It would be like singing our old songs across the network, awakening whoever is still capable of hearing them. Webb was already running calculations. The power requirements would be enormous, and if it fails, the feedback could kill every Vorthak in the network. "Including the ones coming to attack us," Sarah pointed out, "but also including Kreshtak." "I am willing to accept that risk," the Vorthak said immediately. "To save my people from their torment, to prevent other species from suffering as we have, I would gladly die." "That's very noble," Sarah replied, "but dying is Plan B. Plan A is for everyone to survive this." She turned to her team. "How long do we have before the architect fleet arrives?" Vasquez consulted her sensor data. "Based on the transmission lag and standard FTL travel times, maybe 18 hours. Then we have 18 hours to finish Kreshtak's treatment, modify our equipment to amplify the quantum resonance signal, and figure out how to survive what comes next." Zithka looked skeptical. "Captain, even if your plan succeeds and the controlled Vorthak are freed, they will still arrive at this station in combat formations. The confusion alone could result in massive casualties." "That's why we're not going to fight them," Sarah said. "We're going to help them." "Help them?" Sarah was already moving toward the communication console. "Webb, I need you to prepare everything we have on Vorthak medical treatment, cultural restoration, and psychological healing. Vasquez, start fabricating additional medical platforms. If we're going to liberate an entire species, we'd better be ready to help them recover." The audacity of the plan was breathtaking, even by human standards. Instead of preparing for battle, they were preparing for the largest medical and humanitarian operation in galactic history. "You intend to turn this station into a treatment center for hundreds of traumatized Vorthak?" Zithka asked in disbelief. "I intend to show the architects what they never understood about diversity," Sarah replied. "When different species work together, when they choose cooperation over control, they can accomplish things that no single approach could achieve." As the team sprang into action, preparing for an operation that would either save two species or destroy them both, Sarah reflected on what made humans different from the other peoples of the galaxy. It wasn't their technology, their biology, or their intelligence. It was their stubborn refusal to accept that some problems couldn't be solved, some people couldn't be helped, and some situations were hopeless. The architects had made a fundamental error in their assessment of humanity. They saw human unpredictability as a flaw to be corrected, not realizing it was humanity's greatest strength. In 18 hours, they would learn why the galaxy's newest species had earned the respect of creatures who had given up hope of ever being free again. The first thing Sarah Chen noticed when the Architect fleet dropped out of hyperspace was the silence. 300 Vorthak warships materialized at the edge of Kepler Station's sensor range in perfect formation, not a single communication between them. They moved with mechanical precision, like pieces on a game board guided by a single will. Quantum cascade preparation is at 95%, Dr. Webb reported from his position at the modified treatment platform. Around him, dozens of additional medical stations stood ready, each one calibrated to Vorthak physiology. Kreshtak's neural patterns are stable, but Captain, once we begin the transmission, there's no stopping it. Kreshtak himself lay at the center of the array, connected to quantum resonance amplifiers that would boost his consciousness across the network, linking all modified Vorthak. His appearance had continued to change during the final hours of treatment. The obsidian armor was now predominantly blue-green, and his movements carried a grace that spoke of artistic rather than predatory instincts. "I can feel them," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that hadn't been there before. "My people, trapped in their own minds, screaming silently while their bodies serve the architects. Some are so lost they may never find their way back." "But some will," Sarah replied firmly. "And for those who do, we'll be here." Commander Zith-Ka monitored the tactical displays with growing alarm. The Vorthak ships are moving into attack formation, standard orbital bombardment pattern. At their current rate of approach, they'll be in firing range in 17 minutes. Sarah opened a channel to the approaching fleet. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of Kepler Station. I know you can hear me, all of you. I know you're in there fighting to be free. We're going to help you find your way home." No response came, but sensor readings showed minute variations in the fleet's formation, tiny imperfections that suggested the pilots weren't completely under control. "Energy buildup detected on lead ships," reported Dr. Vasquez from the Defensive Systems console. "They're charging weapons." "Begin the cascade," Sarah ordered. Webb initiated the sequence, and immediately every screen in the command center lit up with quantum energy readings. The modified treatment platform hummed with power as it prepared to transmit Kreshtak's restored consciousness pattern across the Architect control network. "Initiating quantum resonance in 3, 2, 1. Mark." The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Kreshtak's body went rigid as his consciousness exploded across the network, touching every controlled Vorthak simultaneously. Through the station's sensors, they could see the approaching fleet stagger as pilots experienced moments of clarity for the first time in decades. But the architects weren't passive observers. As Kreshtak's signal propagated through their network, they began active countermeasures. The lead ships in the attack formation suddenly accelerated, their movements becoming even more mechanical as their pilots' brief moments of freedom were crushed. "They're fighting back," Webb announced unnecessarily. "The network is flooding with suppression signals." On the platform, Kreshtak began to convulse as competing quantum patterns tore at his consciousness. His voice, when it came through the speakers, was layered with harmonics, not just his own, but the voices of hundreds of his people crying out across space. They remember," he gasped. "I can hear them singing. But the architects, they're burning out the neural pathways of anyone who responds." Sarah watched in horror as several ships in the approaching fleet suddenly went dark, their life signs flattering as their pilots died rather than be allowed to regain their freedom. "Captain," Zith-Ka said urgently, "the lead formation is 3 minutes from firing range." The quantum cascade was working, but not fast enough. Some Vorthak were breaking free of their conditioning, but others were being killed by their own control systems. And the ships that remained under Architect control were still approaching with devastating firepower. Sarah made a decision that would have been incomprehensible to most galactic species. Instead of ordering weapons powered or shields raised, she opened every communication channel on the station. Attention all Vorthak ships. My name is Captain Sarah Chen. I am a human being, and I want you to know that we see you. Not as weapons, not as monsters, but as people who have suffered more than anyone should have to suffer. She paused, looking at Kreshtak, writhing on the platform as he fought to maintain the quantum connection. Kreshtak told me about your children, about your songs, about the lives you had before the architects stole them from you. He told me about mountain caves and crystal formations and wind spirits. He told me you were healers and artists and singers. More ships in the fleet began showing signs of pilot confusion. Formation integrity wavered as individual Vorthak struggled against their programming. I know you're in pain. I know every day is torture, being forced to kill when all you want to do is create beauty. But you're not alone anymore. We understand what was done to you, and we can help fix it. The tactical display showed weapons charging on dozens of ships, but also showed others dropping out of formation entirely as their pilots regained enough control to refuse orders. The architects want you to believe that diversity is chaos, that free will is dangerous, that the only answer is their perfect order. But they're wrong. The greatest strength in the galaxy isn't uniformity, it's the harmony we create when different voices come together. Sarah nodded to Webb, who began broadcasting music throughout the system. Not human classical compositions this time, but something new. Reconstructions of ancient Vorthak songs that Kreshtak had shared during his recovery. Melodies that spoke of mountain winds and crystal caves and children learning to sing. The effect was electric. Ships that had been moments from firing suddenly stopped, their pilots overwhelmed by memories of who they used to be. Across the fleet, Vorthak, who had forgotten they were capable of music, began to remember. The cascade is strengthening, Webb reported with amazement. The music is acting as a carrier wave, helping Kreshtak's signal propagate more efficiently. But the architects weren't finished. From the center of the fleet, a ship larger than the others began to emerge. Not Vorthak in design, but something sleek and geometric. As it moved forward, the songs of the liberated Vorthak began to falter, replaced by the cold harmonics of forced compliance. Designate Prime's voice cut through the musical chaos. Emotional manipulation will not prevent the recovery of compromised assets. You have caused significant damage to collective property, but corrective measures are being implemented. The large ship began emitting a signal that caused physical pain to every Vorthak in range. On the platform, Kreshtak screamed as the quantum cascade connection was forcibly severed. Around the fleet, recently liberated Vorthak pilots found themselves losing control again as the architect override signal overwhelmed their recovering consciousness. They're using a neural suppression field, Webb said desperately. It's disrupting the quantum resonance. Sarah watched as freedom slipped away from hundreds of beings who had tasted it for only moments. The architect ship continued its approach, and the Vorthak fleet resumed its attack formation with mechanical precision. But Sarah had learned something important during the brief success of the cascade. The architect's control wasn't perfect. It required constant reinforcement, constant suppression of the Vorthak's natural consciousness. And that gave her an idea that was insane even by human standards. Webb, can you reverse the polarity on our quantum transmitters? Reverse the polarity? Captain, that would create destructive interference with the architect control signals, but it might also disrupt their suppression field, Sarah finished. Do it. The feedback could destroy every quantum system on the station. We'd lose life support, artificial gravity, everything. Will it work? Webb hesitated. It might, but even if it does, We'd be defenseless afterward. Sarah looked around the command center at her team. Webb, brilliant and dedicated, willing to risk everything for scientific discovery. Vasquez, fierce and protective, ready to fight impossible odds. Even Zithka, whose species valued caution above all else, was nodding slowly in agreement. Sometimes the best defense is showing your enemy that you're willing to lose everything to protect what matters, Sarah said. Do it. Webb began the modification sequence while Vasquez and her team prepared for the loss of station systems. On the platform, Kreshtak struggled to maintain consciousness as competing signals tore at his mind. Ready? Webb announced. But Captain, once I activate this, we'll have maybe 60 seconds before our systems shut down completely. Then we'd better make those 60 seconds count. Open a channel to the entire fleet. As Webb initiated the quantum interference pattern, Sarah began to speak, not to the architects, but to the Vorthak, whose freedom was being crushed by cold technology. I know you can't respond right now. I know they've taken your voices away again. But I want you to remember something. You are not alone. There are people in this galaxy who will fight for your right to be free, who will risk everything just to give you a chance at being yourselves again. The quantum interference began to take effect. Across the fleet, architect control signals started to degrade as Sarah's transmission continued. The architects think strength comes from control, but they're wrong. Real strength comes from choosing to help someone even when it's dangerous. It comes from standing up for people who can't stand up for themselves. It comes from believing that every voice matters, every song has value, every choice is sacred. One by one, ships began dropping out of formation as their pilots regained control. The architect vessel increased its suppression signal intensity, but the quantum interference was working. The field was losing coherence. We humans have a saying, no one left behind. It means we don't abandon people just because helping them is hard or dangerous. It means we don't give up on someone just because they've been hurt or changed or broken. More ships were breaking free now, their pilots remembering who they used to be. Some began sending their own transmissions, broken fragments of ancient Vorthak songs, words of gratitude in languages that hadn't been spoken freely in generations. Kreshtak taught us those songs. He shared memories of his children, his people, his world before the architects came. He trusted us with the most precious things he had left, his hope and his love for his family. We won't let that trust be wasted. Station power was failing now. Lights flickered and gravity fluctuated as the quantum interference pattern drew more energy than the systems could sustain. But it was working. Nearly half the Vorthak fleet had broken free of architect control. The enemy ship responded by launching fighters, not Vorthak craft, but something else entirely. Small, fast vessels that moved with the same mechanical precision as the control signals. Automated attack craft, Vasquez reported. They're targeting the liberated Vorthak ships. Sarah watched in horror as the architect drones began systematically destroying any Vorthak vessel that showed signs of pilot independence. It was the ultimate expression of their philosophy. If they couldn't maintain control, they would eliminate the uncontrolled. But the Vorthak weren't defenseless. As more pilots broke free, they began coordinating their defenses. Ships that had been enemies moments before started protecting each other, forming defensive formations around the most recently liberated vessels. Captain, Kreshtak's voice came through the failing speakers, weak but determined. I need to tell you something while I still can. In our culture, the greatest honor is to be chosen as a voice-bearer, someone who carries the songs and stories of our people to other clans. You have become voice-bearers for my people. You have sung our songs when we could not. Power fluctuations were getting worse. The quantum interference pattern was burning out their generators, but it had accomplished its mission. More than 2/3 of the Vorthak fleet was now free of architect control. What happens next is up to you, Sarah broadcast to the liberated ships. You can choose to leave, to find somewhere safe to heal and rebuild. You can choose to fight the architects who enslaved you, or you can choose to help us make sure this never happens to anyone else. Whatever you decide, we'll support your choice. The response came not in words, but in song. Hundreds of Vorthak voices, freed after generations of silence, began to sing together. It wasn't the reconstructed melodies Kreshtak had shared, but something new, a harmony that spoke of gratitude, determination, and hope. The architect ship found itself surrounded by vessels it could no longer control, pilots it could no longer command. For the first time in the encounter, Designate Prime's voice carried something other than cold confidence. This outcome was not predicted. Human behavioral patterns do not conform to standard models. That's because you don't understand what humans are really like, Sarah replied as emergency power kicked in, giving her a few more minutes of communication. We're not just another species to be cataloged and optimized. We're storytellers and dreamers, fighters and healers. We see the universe not as a problem to be solved, but as a song to be sung by every voice that wants to join in. Around the station, liberated Vorthak ships were organizing themselves into protective formations. They weren't fleeing to safety. They were choosing to stay and fight alongside the humans who had given them back their freedom. "This is Kreshtak, speaking for the survivors of the Vorthak," came a transmission from one of the liberated ships. "We offer our voices to the human song. We pledge our strength to the defense of all free peoples, and we swear that no other species will suffer as we have suffered." The architect vessel found itself facing not just a few dozen human ships and Kepler station, but an entire fleet of beings who had every reason to want revenge. But more importantly, it faced something the architects had never encountered before: a coalition based on choice rather than control, diversity rather than uniformity, hope rather than fear. Designate Prime made one final transmission. "This delay is temporary. The collective will adapt. Future contact protocols will account for human variables." Then the architect ship vanished into hyperspace, leaving behind only its destroyed drones and a fleet of newly free Vorthak. As station systems slowly came back online, Sarah found herself surrounded by beings who had been the galaxy's most feared predators just hours before. Now they moved with the grace of their original nature, their voices raised in songs that spoke of gratitude and newfound purpose. "Captain," Kreshtak approached, his appearance now completely transformed. The blue-green coloring had spread across his entire carapace, and his movements were those of an artist rather than a warrior. "My people wish to know if humans have room in their songs for more voices." Sarah smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the station's restored life support systems. "Humans have a saying, 'The more the merrier.' It means our songs are always better when more people join in." Over the following weeks, as word spread through the galaxy about what had happened at Kepler Station, other species began to respond. Some with fear, the idea that humans could inspire such loyalty from the galaxy's most dangerous creatures was unsettling, but others with hope. If the Vorthak could be freed from architect control, perhaps other enslaved peoples could be liberated as well. Reports began coming in of Vorthak ships appearing throughout the galaxy, but not as raiders or killers. They served as protectors now, guardians who watched over trade routes and colonies with the dedication of beings who understood the value of freedom. Their presence sent a clear message to anyone who would threaten peaceful worlds. The galaxy's most formidable warriors now served those who chose cooperation over conquest. But perhaps more importantly, the Vorthak's transformation inspired other species to reconsider their relationship with humanity. The newcomers, who had seemed so chaotic and unpredictable, had demonstrated something profound, that true strength came not from controlling others, but from freeing them to become their best selves. As Sarah stood in the observation deck of the newly reconstructed Kepler station, watching Vorthak and human ships training together in formations that would have been impossible under architect control, she reflected on what her species had really accomplished. They hadn't just freed the Vorthak, they had proven that diversity, compassion, and the willingness to take risks for others were forces more powerful than any technology of control. The architects were still out there, somewhere in the vast galaxy, probably already working on new methods of subjugation. But they would find their path increasingly difficult. Every species the humans encountered, every friendship they forged, every act of selfless cooperation strengthened the growing alliance of free peoples. And at the heart of it all were the Vorthak, no longer the galaxy's most feared predators, but its most devoted guardians. They had learned something from their human liberators that would reshape the galaxy, that the strongest bonds aren't forged by force, but by choice. In the months that followed, as the alliance grew and new threats were faced and overcome, historians would mark the events at Kepler Station as the beginning of a new age. Not an age of human dominance, but an age where the galaxy's greatest strength came from its greatest diversity, voices of every species joining together in a song of freedom that no force in the universe could silence.